Has anyone ever told you, don't worry about the ungodly? They will get what's coming to them. Because ultimately, we are to put our trust and our delight in the Lord. Reverend Dr. Gina M. Stewart preached a powerful and timely message entitled Lean In from Psalm 37. She helps us to remember and to understand that our lives are in God's hands. He's going to take care of us. So what I want you to do, gather some people, call some people together, get them together and let them know it's time to hear a word from the Lord. So lean in. Let's hear what the Lord has to say through Dr. Stewart.
I want to invite your attention to Psalm 37, beginning with verse 1 through 4. Psalm 37, beginning with verse 1 through 4. And I'll be reading from the New International Version of Scripture. When you find it, say, I got it. If you're still looking, say, hold up. All right, we'll wait for you. My mentor used to say, God doesn't give brownie points for finding it fast. When all else fails, just check out that table of contents. It'll bless your life. Tell somebody that table of contents will bless your life. To all of you who are on site and online, we give God thanks for you today. The word of the Lord reads like this. Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. This is the word of God for the people of God. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of the Lord shall stand forever. As you take your seat, would you shout my title to your neighbor? Tell them, lean in. I want to talk about lean in. Several years ago, Lady Kim, I came across a book by Eugene Peterson entitled A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. Peterson borrowed this title from Friedrich Nietzsche, who is famous for having announced the death of God. And Nietzsche, who is now dead himself, saw in our time, or in his time, our culture's desire to live a quick and easy life and with a quick and easy faith. And when he made this observation, he wrote these words. He said, the essential thing in heaven and earth is that there should be a long obedience in the same direction. That thereby results, and has always resulted in the long run, something which has made life worth living. He goes on to say, it is what redeems suffering and loss and senseless violence. It's what allows us to deepen our own faith and our own prayer life so that God is neither the cause of human suffering nor a paralyzed bystander as suffering unfolds. Nietzsche goes on to assert that God rather is in everything, joy and sorrow, fear and hope, life and death. He asserts that God is in the delivery room and at the deathbed and every moment in between. I'm certain that for many of us who are here for worship, whether you're on site or online, Nietzsche's words deeply resonate with some of us. The notion that being faithful in a faithless world requires resilience. It requires a deep-rooted trust in God. It's not always easy, and there are moments when doubts creep in, testing our commitment and obedience. Because even though we know that it pays to serve God, we know what the Bible says, we often discover that what we know is incongruent with what we experience. In fact, the text that claims our attention today offers counsel around those moments when doubts threaten to sabotage our commitment. The text that claims our attention raises several enduring questions for the believer. And some of those questions are, what will the members of the religious community take as the decisive clue in the way that life should be lived? How shall we orient our lives? What will be the determining factors that guide our decisions? What ethical commandments will serve as our moral compass to guide our choices and our actions? And finally, what values will we prioritize? Particularly since we know by experience that life is not always fair, that you can live right and still experience trouble, and that the righteous don't always seem to get their fair share. In theory, these answers to these questions may seem obvious, yet in practice, we often find ourselves navigating a complex landscape where clarity can be obscured by competing voices and influences. While we may know in theory that faith should guide our decisions, the truth is, and the reality is, that we are often confronted with distractions that pull us in a variety of directions. And one of the most troubling distractions is the apparent prosperity of the wicked. It's hard, come on, talk to me now, not to feel some kind of way when those who disregard God and do it with great delight seem to flourish, while those striving to live righteously face hardship and trouble. And so the writer of this text understands the tension and issues a warning against allowing ourselves to become frustrated and agitated by what seems like God's indifference or God's inconsistency. It's a common temptation to measure God's justice by what we see happening around us. And can I pause parenthetically here and tell you, you ought to just congratulate yourself. You ought to congratulate yourself because you're still standing. You ought to congratulate yourself because you're still trusting God in spite of the fact that there are some things that you brought to church with you this morning that are making you scratch your head. I said congratulate yourself. And give yourself a clap, give yourself a hand, give yourself a round of applause, because I'm on assignment to tell you that your faith is deeper than you even imagine. Because the fact that you still say, I will bless the Lord at all times, and God's praise shall continually be in my mouth, is a sign that the enemy didn't win this week. Congratulate yourself and give God some praise that you still have joy, and that your testimony still pivots around the fact that God is a good God. Text speaks directly to our need for patience in God's timing. It carries the tone of an impassioned response to the faithful's interrogation or questions about the incongruence of lived experiences. And the writer offers instruction to keep us from losing faith in God's justice, and to keep us from becoming anxious when things are not going the way we believe they should. And the reason why this is important is because incongruence can be a deal breaker for some people. There are some people who don't stick around, God help me preach, for the conclusion of the whole matter. They make temporary, permanent decisions based on temporary inconveniences. But God is using the writer in the text to remind us not to become anxious when things are not going the way we believe they should. So he begins with an injunction to forego concern or to be overly irritated by the actions of the wicked. Notice what verse 1 says, do not fret because of the wicked. Do not be envious because of wrongdoers. I really like the way King Jimmy says it. He says, fret not thyself because of evildoers. Neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity. In other words, don't be anxious. Don't be overly worried or afraid or agitated or irritated by evildoers. Don't be anxious or even envious of those who deliberately and intentionally do wrong and inflict harm on others. Don't be agitated by those who relish in injustice, who relish in inequity, those who have no moral compass. Don't be agitated or irritated by those who are guided by a commitment to self-interest and self-aggrandizement. Don't give away or expend your energy to people who are not going to last. Nudge somebody, says, save some of that breath for the back end of your life. You're going to need it for another crisis. You're going to need it for something more substantial than this. Do not fret because of evildoers. And then verse 2 further validates the assertion. Watch what it says. It says, for like grass, they will soon wither. I'm in the Bible. Like green plants, they will soon die. I like the way the Common English Bible puts it, Bishop. It says, don't get upset over evildoers. Don't be jealous of those who do wrong, for they will fade fast like grass. They will wither like green vegetables. In other words, the wicked are temporary. The wicked are unsubstantial. They are no more real and permanent than the finite self upon which their way is based. In other words, what the writer is saying is that they may be frustrating, but they really have no future. You must stick around for the conclusion of the matter to see that God will bring all of this to a resolution if we faint and don't lose hope. Touch your neighbor and say, don't faint now. You got to stick around for the conclusion of the matter. This is more than mere advice to ignore what is happening or pretend that what we see is not real. Touch your neighbor and say, I ain't crazy. This here stuff is real. The presence of evil and wickedness is real in our world. We don't have to look very far to see examples of evil. As my executive assistant often says, evil seems to be on clearance. We see it all around us in acts of violence and discrimination and injustice that disrupts lives and communities. We see it in the deliberate erasure of black accomplishments, from school curriculums that sanitize history to policies that undermine progress. It speaks to a willful disregard for truth and justice. We see it in the intentional withholding of resources and support for communities that desperately need it, leaving the vulnerable to fend for themselves. We see it in systems that perpetuate structural inequality, exploitation, and oppression, affecting individuals and families. The impact of evil is evident in the struggles that we face every day. So we're not crazy. Touch yourself and say, child, I ain't crazy. I'm glad I came to church. This is worth the price of admission just to be told that I ain't crazy. That what I see is real. That is not a figment of my imagination. And it is not something that we can wish away. It is a sobering reminder that life is not always fair, and that the systems that are designed to maintain inequality are often intentional and deeply rooted. You see, we live in a world where the playing field is not always fair, and the playing field is not always level, where there are people, in the words of Dr. Sam Proctor, who start in front of the scratch line because they inherit benefits that they do not deserve, while there are people who start behind the scratch line who inherit deficits that they do not deserve. It is a world where the benefits of equity and equality are withheld from certain groups, a world where the righteous seem to suffer more than their fair share, and the wicked seem to prosper. A world where women and the children and the poor and the elderly are often pushed to the margins and left to bear the brunt of society's failure. And not only does evil seem to flourish, but some days evil seems like it's winning. Winning by dishonesty, winning by deceit, winning by cheating, winning by lying, winning by wrongdoing. And the disparity between those who strive to do good and those who seem to succeed through wrongdoing can be very disheartening. But the writer offers us a word of encouragement so that we will not fall victim to doubting God's faithfulness. May I pause parenthetically here and say that the enemy likes nothing more than inspiring doubt in the heart of the believer concerning God's faithfulness. The psalmist says, don't let your observations, however, about the wicked color your interpretation about life and about God. Parenthetically speaking, God is still good. He good on a bad day. I need a few people to give God some praise. That God is still good. That in spite of what I see, God is still good. God is still able. God is still who God says God is. And so the psalmist offers the frustrated faithful a remedy for this dilemma, an intentional act of faith, a double imperative. Somebody say a double imperative. Two equal commands, not one or the other, but both. Note what he says: trust in the Lord and do good. Somebody shout a double imperative. Trust in the Lord and do good. The psalmist doesn't say trust in the Lord or do good. He says trust in the Lord and do good. Somebody say I need to do both. This is not a multiple choice exam. This is not a suggestion. This is a take-home quiz where the answers are applicable for life. Trust in the Lord, Jehovah, the self-existent one. Trust in God, not our paycheck, not other human beings, not the government, not the Congress, not the Senate, not the mayor. Trust. Thank you, scholars. This is not to say that these institutions and relationships do not command a certain level of trust or confidence for navigating life. But what the psalmist is cautioning us to do is to avoid misplaced trust. The peril that accompanies placing our trust in systems, people, and institutions that are capable of betraying us, failing us, and disappointing us. Trust in the Lord. Take refuge. Place your confidence in Jehovah and do good. And then he gives us not just a double imperative, but a coordinating conjunction. He says, and do good. Not one or the other, but to do both at the same time. Trusting in God and actively doing good are meant to be taken together. They are not separate. They are interwoven into the fabric of a faithful life. That despite the apparent triumph of evildoers, we are called to trust that God is good, to trust in God's justice, and to trust that ultimately good will prevail even when the evil or the circumstances say otherwise. But the trust is not passive. The writer says, and do good. Doing good is an intentional act of resistance. Look at somebody and say, that's real good. I think I'll tweet that. I said, doing good is an intentional act of resistance. It disarms the power of wickedness by refusing to mirror the cruelty and chaos that we see. When we choose to do good, we're making a declaration that evil will not dictate our actions. It will not poison our spirits. Doing good is not passivity. It's purposeful resistance. It's shining where there's darkness. It's choosing compassion over cruelty, righteousness over wrongdoing, and faithfulness over frustration. Look at somebody and say, don't get distracted, child. Live beyond self-interest. Pursue the interests of others. Cultivate moral qualities that will contribute to the creation of a more just world. Trust in the Lord and do good. Look at somebody and say, that's good, but it ain't easy. Do I have any witnesses that there's not always a lot of incentive to do good and trust in God? Good is often taken for granted. Sometimes good goes unreciprocated. Sometimes good is overrated. Doing good can be exhausting. We see that there are people in the world who are thriving off of doing as much as they can to make life miserable for other people. The pain that's being inflicted on other folks, snatching resources, firing folks, come on here, off of their jobs, making decisions with a slew of executive orders that make life miserable for other people. The deliberate neglect and cruelty embedded in these actions makes us wonder, does it really pay to do good? And can we just go and tell the truth? Since ain't nobody in here but us. Some days we want to fight. Some days we want to cuss. Some days we want to throw a temper tantrum. Some days we want to shut ourselves off and go into exile and delegate compassion to everybody else. But I hear the Spirit say, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. Come on, help me preach. In all of your ways, acknowledge God, and God will direct your path. Do I have any company in the room who can say, I tried God and God sustained me? But he doesn't stop there. He gives a third imperative. He says, take delight in the Lord, and the Lord will give you the desires of your heart. In other words, there's a reward for doing the right thing. Look at somebody and say, serving the Lord will pay off after a while. In other words, he says, bend your life, incline your life toward doing the will of God. Bend your will toward the will of God. Align with the desires of God's heart, rather than being swayed by the contradictions that surround us. Lean in to the will of God. Now that's good advice, but it doesn't necessarily resolve the tension. Is it possible to live this way? And if we choose to live this way, is it really worth it? Does it really pay off? Why would the psalmist issue an imperative that seemed so contradictory? Because the truth of the matter is, it's difficult not to be distracted. It's difficult not to be agitated. It's difficult not to be frustrated by the arrogance and the injustice that we see. It's maddening to see how the wicked get away with murder. It's maddening to see how the wicked can sow discord and profit from the suffering without accountability, without going to jail, without facing consequences for their actions. And they are not accidental. They are intentional. They are targeted. And if we're not careful, their evil schemes can distract our focus and consume us to the degree that we miss and lose our perspective. I know I'm not the only one in here who has ever wondered, is it really worth it? We see the evidence that seems to suggest otherwise. So why would the psalmist tell us or issue not just a double imperative, but a triple imperative? Well, I believe I have a sneaky suspicion. As a matter of fact, I have a hypothesis that I want to propose for why the psalmist says this. You see, the writer of Psalm 37 is attributed to David, the shepherd, the king, the warrior, who offers counsel from the long view. Can you touch somebody and say, sometimes you got to stick around? You can't walk with God 30 seconds and then think you're going to have a testimony about how God's going to bring you out. Sometimes you got to hang around. Y'all ain't talking. For the conclusion of the matter, I need some people in here that have walked with God for a while, and you've seen God bring you through many dangers, toils and snares, bring you through divorce, bring you through sickness, brought you through COVID, brought you through death, brought you through grief, brought you through unemployment, brought you through lies, brought you through tears. Do I have any witnesses that can testify that God has been faithful? And what you have discovered is that sometimes you gotta wait, because some things only come in time. David has seen a lot of stuff, and he knew that God had a mighty good track record. He fought Goliath and won, suffered betrayal at the hand of Saul, made mistakes and abused his power. So David has seen the hand of God. And when you've seen too many victories, you can't let defeat have the last word. Do I have any company in here that can say, I've seen too many victories? I can't let defeat have the last word. Perhaps that's why he offers a triple imperative, a divine strategy for those who feel consumed by the apparent success of the wicked. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the Lord and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. What this suggests to me is that the psalmist is telling us that we should not just be concerned with outcomes. But we should be concerned about orientation. Somebody shout orientation. A way of being that positions ourselves toward God. That we orient ourselves so much toward God that despite the distractions of the wicked, we still lean into God because we know that God is going to have the last word. That even though the outcome may be a motivator, it cannot be the only motivator, because the blessing and the victory is not just in having outcomes, but the blessing and the victory is in living a life that is oriented toward God. And can I tell you why? Because a faithful life will result in a fulfilled life. A faithful life will result in a fruitful life. A life where our desires are aligned with the heart of God. And what I've discovered is that when I start liking what God likes, when I start loving what God loves, that my desires, God help me preach, and God's heart are so in sync with one another that whatever way he blesses me, I'm satisfied. And whatever God decides to do is already all right, because I know that the final outcome is in God's hands. Can you preach to somebody and tell them, trust in the Lord and do good? Delight yourself in God, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Note here that delight precedes desire. Most of us use this verse like a blank check. That if I just delight in God, I'll get the desires of my heart. But that word delight means to be malleable. It means to be pliable. It's talking about alignment. That when I get in alignment with God, I trust God's timing. That God will give me the desires of my heart. Can somebody thank God that God will give it to you? Can you preach to somebody and say, in other words, God will give it to you? And not only that, God will give you some things. I'm about to shout out my pumps that you didn't even ask for. God will give you peace where there's chaos. God will give you joy that the world can't take away. God will give you strength when you feel like giving up. When your life is oriented toward God, God will shock you and surprise you. God will give you the desires of your heart. When you orient your life toward God, there's nothing that God won't do. God will give you joy unspeakable. He'll give you peace that passes all understanding. He'll open doors that nobody can shut. He'll prepare a table in the presence of your enemies. Take delight in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. I stopped by this morning just to tell somebody, lean in. Can you preach to somebody and say, lean in? Lean in to God's presence. God is our refuge and our strength, a present help in time of trouble. Somebody shout, lean in. Draw near to God, and God will draw near to you. Somebody shout, draw near to God. Lean in to God's presence. He that dwells in the secret place of the Most High God shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Lean in to God's purposes. Know that the work that God started, God's going to bring it to completion. Can you preach to somebody and tell them, my life is in God's hands? God's purposes are not thwarted by the schemes of the wicked, because what God has for you, it is for you. Can you preach to yourself and say, lean in to God's presence? Lean in to God's promises, purposes. Lean in to God's promises. I don't know about you, but I'm mighty glad that God is a promise-keeping God. He said, lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. He says, when you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. And when you go through the fire won't burn you. And when you go through the rivers won't drown you. Do I have any company that can say, trust in the Lord with all thine heart? Grab somebody's hand. Say, I believe I'll trust him. I believe I'll serve him. I believe I'll walk with him. For the God I serve, yes sir, will keep you in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Do I have anybody? Do I have any company that can clap your hands and give God praise? Be not dismayed, whatever betide, God will take care of you. Do I have any witnesses that know that we will? He'll make a way. He'll turn your mourning into dancing. Shout yes, 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 yes. Come on, clap your hands and give him glory. Tell somebody, I believe I trust him. I believe that I lean in to this God who has made us a promise that he will be with us always, even to the end of the age. You ought to hug somebody. Tell them, I'm going to lean in to God. I'm going to orient my life toward God. Fret not thyself because of evildoers. Don't be envious. Lift your hand and say, don't be envious against the workers of iniquity. Here's the shout they're going to soon be cut off. Look at somebody and say, can I shout now? Or do I have to wait? Or you talking to the wrong neighbor, say, can I shout now? Or do I have to wait? Find somebody and say, they're going to soon be cut off and wither like the green earth. Do I have anybody that can take 30 seconds and give God some praise? I'ma lean in to his promises. I'ma lean in to his purposes. I'ma lean in to his presence, because it does not yet appear what we shall be. But when God gets through with us, we shall come forward like pure gold. Somebody, anybody, everybody, clap your hands and give God your best praise. Shout yeah, 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 yeah. Look at somebody, say everything is gonna be all right. Weeping may endure for a night. I feel my help now, but joy is coming in the morning. Do I have anybody that can thank God that his anger is for just a moment, but his favor is for a lifetime? Can you preach to somebody and say, I got favor for a lifetime? You talking to the wrong neighbor. Tell him I got favor for a lifetime. Weeping may endure for a night, but God is coming in the morning. Shout yeah, 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 yeah. I dare you to clap your hands. I dare you to give him glory. I dare you to open your mouth and act like you already got the victory. I dare you to praise him. I dare you to open your mouth and give God your best praise. Delight thyself in the Lord, and God will give you. Tell somebody, God's gonna do it. God's gonna give you favor. God's gonna open the door. God's gonna make a way. God's gonna pave a highway. God will prepare a table in the presence of my enemies. Shout yes, yes, yeah. You ought to bless him. You ought to bless him. Tell somebody, I believe I lean in. What a fellowship. What a joy divine. Leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessing is. What a peace is life. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Safe and secure from all alarm. I'm leaning. I dare you to lean. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Shout yes, yes, yeah. I wish I had a few praises. I wish I had a few folk that have had to lean on God. I wish I had a few folk that have had to trust God. I wish I had a few folk that have had to watch God. Can you take 30 seconds and bless the Lord, oh my soul, and everything that's within me? I will bless his holy name. Shout yeah, yes, yes. Look at somebody say, I got a feeling. I feel my help now. That everything is gonna be all right. 5, 3 people say, I got a feeling that everything, every little thing, every unknown thing, every hard thing is gonna be all right. Shout yes, yes. moment in this brush arbor and give God some praise that you read the end of the book, and the book says that we still win. Do I have anybody that's on the winning side that can open your mouth and throw your head back and give God your best? Come on, let the redeemed of the Lord say something. Whom the Lord has delivered. Grab somebody. Say, he delivered me out of the hand of the enemy. He delivered me out of the paw of the bear. He delivered me out of the hand of the Philistine. He delivered me out of the hand of my enemies. He prepared the table in the presence of my enemies. He anoints my head with oil. My cup, yes, sir, it overflows. And surely goodness and mercy shall follow me. Just pat yourself on the back. Say, I got some stalkers walking in behind me. Goodness and mercy. Come on, clap your hands and give him glory. Say, I thank God for my stalkers. Goodness and mercy. Gonna follow me all the days. Somebody shout, all the days. All the days. That's how you made 31 years. Because you got some stalkers walking in behind you. Somebody shout, all the days. That's how you made it through the divorce. That's how you made it through the job loss. That's how you made it through the business calling. That's how you made it through the sickness. That's how you made it through the grief. Somebody shout, all the days.